We're tuned into Recovery TV, the voice of hope, with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Discussions and information on addiction and mental health issues. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Narcan. Everyone should get some. Put it in your car, put it in your purse, put it in your pocket. Everyone should carry it. It saves lives. My guest today is Charlene Fonseca, who is in recovery, and she has a story. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And the reason why I asked you to come on is because we are the voice of hope, and you are a statue of hope. So, Charlene, tell us your story.
Absolutely. Thank you, John, for having me. And as you mentioned, hope. It's done so much for me in my journey, in my life, and my way of giving that back and sharing is to share my story in hopes that I can inspire others that come after me. So again, my name is Charlene Fonseca. I am a mother. I am an advocate for mental health, for substance use, for recovery. I'm also an educator and a lifelong learner. And I just hope to be an inspiration and hope
Story.
version.
Okay.
That's
Good.
okay.
That's good.
So my journey, let me tell you a little bit about my background.
Okay.
So I born and raised here in Rhode Island. I'm from Central Falls. I am first generation Cape Verdean American. I identify as African American. And my parents came here from the Cape Verde Islands and always told us, education was the way to get things done. I had a lot of expectations put on me as a young child. I also experienced a lot of trauma growing up, right? I was sexually abused as a child. I experienced emotional abuse. I experienced a lot of deaths, whether that be in the community or family members. I remember going to funeral homes at the age of 5, 6, and that just being a repetitive thing. And growing up in a community like Central Falls, you see a lot, and you grow up very quickly. But I did well for myself, right? I went off to a great college. I got my master's degree, and I always said I would come back here to Rhode Island. And in terms of alcohol, it was very normalized in our culture, right? Cape Verdeans, whether it's a death or a party, there was alcohol visible. Underage use, right? So it was very normalized. I've never seen a sober person in my life. So I am the first person in recovery in my family. And it's still very stigmatized in our community. So I always had I knew my relationship to alcohol wasn't like everyone else's. There was something there, but I just couldn't pinpoint it at the time. I didn't know all these resources existed. I didn't know what alcoholism was. We didn't talk about mental health. So things kind of built up. And in my adult life, after I had my daughter, in 2019, I went through an abusive relationship. It was abusive emotionally and physically. And with that, I turned to alcohol and drugs as a coping mechanism.
Again, or
It
was
was
the first time?
That was when my relationship changed.
Okay.
Right? People talk about in sobriety, they talk about a moment that things changed. That's when it changed because I was then using it as a coping mechanism.
Yeah, crutch.
A crutch, yeah, to deal with the stresses. I never learned coping skills, right? It's not something we talked about in our home, in school.
Right.
So I never learned those skills. So for me, that was when my relationship turned very unhealthy. I was using every day. I was drinking every day. I was surrounding myself with people, places, and things that just were not good for me in my life. And I had a young daughter to care for, and that was extremely hard.
Right.
And I think for mothers in particularly, it's even more stigmatized because we drinking alone for fear of like the stigma carried on you. As a single mother, it was only me. So there was an extra stigma on top of my culture who shames things like that. that ostracizes you from the family. And I began to isolate myself because who wants to be that person? Right? Nobody wakes up and says, oh, I'm going to go drink and use drugs and destroy my life. Right? It comes from, for me, it was my mental health. I've been diagnosed with depression, with anxiety, with PTSD, and my coping mechanism turned to alcohol and drugs. And luckily for me, my daughter turned 4 last year, and I promised her that was her birthday gift, to give her my sobriety, because she deserves everything and more. So I got sober last April, and I went to Butler. I was just looking up resources because I couldn't turn to anyone. I didn't know anything about sober life, recovery, AA, NA meetings. Smart. I had no idea this beautiful club existed, and there's so many resources. So I went to Butler. I did all their programs, and I still go back for maintenance, right? And growing up, that was the place for crazy people in my family, in my community. So I tried to normalize that to other people, to know, like, you can get help. They helped me. They saved my life. And through that journey, I realized I had mental health struggles, right? I'm on medication. I realized that there was always something missing in my soul, and I was missing that self-love, appreciation, acceptance, because I wasn't shown that growing up. I wasn't, just being me was not enough. So I had to learn that I am enough, and I don't have to be anything outside of myself to show up to the world. Right. So that kind of, what's the word? It
brought you full circle.
It brought me full circle, exactly. It brought me full circle, and I realized that that was the missing piece that I was looking for my whole life.
So in the Cape Verdean culture,
yes,
what happened to you is acceptable, I would imagine, right? Alcohol.
Yes. It's very normalized in our community, yes.
Right. Now, do you have siblings?
I do. I do.
How are they?
They're fine. You know, none of them. We have a history of mental illness. Yeah. My grandfather died by suicide. The Cape Verdean community has a huge suicide rate. And even with alcoholism and drug use and mental health, people just don't identify as that, or they don't seek the resources. It's huge. And with these overdose deaths, you see a huge population of Cape Verdeans in Central Falls and Pawtucket. We just don't talk about it, which is half the problem.
Yeah, it's like you want to sweep it under the rug.
Sweep it under the rug.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Instead of going in and having the community-based folks to go in there and try to give information to people that that there is help out there. And, you know, and I can't, I'm going back in my head. Did you find me?
I did. I saw you on Facebook, and I reached out to you.
Okay, all right. Because, you know, there's a lot of folks that are struggling. All right. Alcohol use is like through the roof since COVID. I want to talk a little bit more about that, about the Cape Verdean community. And I also want to talk about the switch that you got, because I read your resume and I'm saying, oh my God. We're going to be right back. You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, Sean Tassoni. We'll be right back after these messages with Colleen Fonseca.
Now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, Sean Tassoni. Colleen Fonseca is in the house, and she is in recovery, and she's been talking about her life in recovery. So it goes to show you that on the tagline for Recovery TV is there's hope. Absolutely. There's hope. There's a young lady who used alcohol, became very successful by just turning the switch.
Turning the switch.
So thank you for that. So tell us about when that actually happened, that switch turned on and you said, you know what, enough is enough. I have a daughter. I need to fly straight. I need to be a productive citizen. I'm a single parent, and I have to make sure that my daughter gets what she deserves moving forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there was a switch, but I will say there was a lot that happened before the switch. I was working on myself, both professionally, personally. I was starting to look at different habits that I had, and I started a little bit of therapy work, which was extremely helpful. But something in me said, this can't be life. Like, this is not all that life has to offer. Like, as much as I was functioning and I was doing great work, I knew there was so much more inside of me, and that I had so much more to give to my daughter, to myself. I owed it to myself, but to my community as well. I've always been community oriented, and I just said enough is enough. I knew I could not do it alone. I'm very hyper independent, like a lot of folks, very hyper independent, and it was always, I'll figure it out. I'll find a way. I can do this a little longer. And something in me, I won't say I woke up and had this like realization, but I did have like a spiritual awakening, and I said, I need help. I need help, and I cannot do this alone. I don't have family, friends that I can reach out to, but I know there are resources outside in Rhode Island. And that's when I made that call to Butler Hospital. And they were very welcoming.
So you went to Butler for...
I did the ADP program. I also did the DBT program and the women's IOP.
Okay.
Back to back to back.
All right, so you came out, and you said to yourself, let me go back to school. What happened?
I was already in school. So I was
Okay.
getting my business degree at Providence College. And prior to that, I already had my degrees from Georgetown University in government, and I had a criminology degree, my master's degree from George Washington. So I decided I had disenrolled one semester for my MBA, but I decided to go back. And I also decided to like put a lot of energy into my business, The Greatest You Consulting.
You know, I looked at this resume that you have. And it's quite the resume. And I have to give you a lot of credit by turning your life around and to become CEO, chief consultant, the work that you're currently doing now to help others. You know, I always think of that because, you know, you had asked me a question while we were off air. Are you in recovery? And no, I'm not. And the reason why I'm sitting here is because of what happened to me as a young man back when I was 18 years old, and a family issue. And I always thought to myself, it's not right what happened to me, and I don't want it to happen to anybody else.
Exactly.
So when I went into the General Assembly, I started with substance use and mental health. I started with homelessness. I did a lot with animals. You know, we were down, way down in animal legislation, and then when I left, we were number 4 in the country.
Wow.
You know, I'm on the council in Smithfield. I just did one of the toughest ordinances. It is the toughest ordinance in the state for animals, because I look at it this way. If I can't make a difference, then I don't deserve to sit here,
Right.
nor do I deserve to sit on the council, nor did I deserve to get into the General Assembly. We're all put on this earth, as you are, to make a difference.
Right.
You are making a difference. When you go and you speak to, whether it's a small group or big group, about how your life changed by that switch changing, alternate your life. And in your community, which is very tough community, meaning the stuff that they do as a group. I was in Central Falls. I know what went on in Central Falls when I was a business agent for 9 years with folks, with kids not going to school, with kids coming to school for 2 or 3 months and go back to Cape Verde because mom and dad made a lot of money here and they went back to Cape Verde with all the cash. And the kids actually suffered by being pulled out of schools.
Right.
So you are a leader, whether you want to believe it or not. I'm telling you, you're a leader. You are certainly a big leader in the community. And I hope and pray that your community watches this program and sees someone like you, that there is hope in recovery. There is a way to turn your life around. You're a mom. You're probably one of a great parent, and your daughter's going to grow up just fine.
It's true. It's true. She was struggling a lot at the beginning of the school year, and she just won Most Improved for the month of January in her school. So it's a direct testament to changing generational things, right? Like, I know I'm that person in my family. I don't even consider myself a leader anymore. I'm just a person living my life, right? And if we had more people just living their lives and authentically, the world and with kindness and compassion, right? Like, in my recovery, I'm just so compassionate that I didn't have that quality in me before. And everyone deserves humanity. Everyone deserves to be treated with kindness, right? Even the animals, and respect. Right? And one thing that recovery gave me was my self-respect back and self-love. I didn't have self-love prior to this.
And you need to be a leader and not a follower.
Yes.
And we're going to take another quick break.
Thank you.
You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, Sean Tassoni, with Colleen Fonseca. We'll be right back after these messages.
Now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, Sean Tassoni, with Colleen Fonseca, who is in recovery and has got quite the story. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing. It gives people a lot of hope listening to a young lady of your stature coming out of trouble, getting into recovery, changing your life around, and now you're a big shot.
I wouldn't say that, but I'm here.
So tell me about what you're running into as far as stigma goes.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned a few of it, right? Young lady, younger than most that are seeking recovery, and I'm a woman as well as a woman of color, right? So there's a lot of stigma around those three things and what an addict looks like, right? And like, people wouldn't necessarily look at me and say, oh yeah, like, she's an addict. So I want to destigmatize that, like, what it looks like. And there are signs as well, like, if you see someone changing their behavior, isolating, avoiding situations and events, there are signs. It could be anxiety, depression. So I just want folks to, like, look at those signs in their family and friends. And I wish for me that somebody had said, tap me on my shoulder, Carlene, you don't look right, or do you think, like, you have a problem, you should seek help? And nobody ever did that to me. So I want to do that to others. So by me sharing my story, I'm helping to destigmatize what addiction, what recovery looks like. And folks are actually coming to me because they see that I'm public with my story and asking me for support. So,
well, Colleen, I want to thank you for coming on today. And I want to tell people, if you see something, say something.
Absolutely.
And thank you, and I wish you all the best on your recovery and moving forward, especially a little daughter.
Thank you so much.
You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. We'll see you next week.